And now for the Sonic Triple Trouble special, which chronologically takes place before issue 27 because they want to confuse the audience. We start out with Eggman having a Chaos Emerald. Chaos Emeralds are surprisingly under-relied on in the comics so far. I've been really impressed with how many different plots the issues have had that didn't even mention these. So that's a really major point in the comics' direction. Eggman puts the emerald in a power inducer that will drive his largest, most inefficient mega engine to pollute the globe in days, which he'll magically be immune to the effects of on his lungs for some reason. And inefficient? Why would he say that? Why would he brag about an engine of his sucking? It's not just that it causes pollution. An inefficient engine is inefficient. It doesn't work as well as a good engine. Why would you brag about that? Anyways, the Badnik says that he had set the controls for a 6-pronged inducer instead, this being the screw-up by a robot described in the Sonic Triple Trouble manual that makes an explosion happen. The emerald is separated into 2 equal shards, which rocket into orbit magically in opposite directions. See, this is all new. In the game, he used all the emeralds, and there was no emerald separating. This is already a creative new spin on the story. After Eggman says intriguingly that half a Chaos Emerald could be dangerously erratic and powerful, I guess because its energy from below its barrel shell is exposed, Eggman asks the telephone operator to get him bounty hunters or us. Yes, a telephone operator. Because this takes place in the 40s, don't you know? Maybe he made the world like that because of nostalgia, because he grew up in the 40s? I don't know. We cut to Tails, who says that he knew he'd find Sonic in the Knothole kitchen. There's only one kitchen for the entirety of Knothole Village? Wow, this place must get really crowded at mealtime. Not to mention it looks completely different from when we saw Sonic and his friends eating mush after the space episode. Sonic is eating a chili dog. I thought those are alright. And Tails says he wants him to follow him to the control room because Rotor's onto something. And Sonic says, "Sure, big guy," which I felt was kind of insulting to him actually. Sonic points out that Rotor was working on a submarine for Tails until he found something on his radar with the power readings of a Chaos Emerald. Good thing Rotor installed a power reading device in the submarine for some reason. He says that the power readings are erratic, naturally since it's split in half, and it's landed in the Great Forest like a meteorite. And then, for some reason, the power overflowing from the cut-in-half Chaos Emerald decides to create a new zone. Again, I'm confused about whether this means portal to another universe, or a small new region, meaning that Mobius was made a little larger in size overall, just to fit in this new region of it. How many times has this happened? How gigantic is Mobius by this point? The size of Jupiter? It does make sense that this wacky thing would happen from an overflow of magic from the emerald, as it is a Chaos Emerald after all. The chaos is in there for a reason. Too much magic brings about chaos. After Sonic runs to the zone to check it out, we get the introduction of Fang the Sniper, a Mobian who is willing to work for Eggman, because I guess apparently he's just that selfish that he'd want to benefit someone who ruined his own planet and made his life significantly worse, instead of wanting to spite him at all costs. Okay then. He immediately shows himself to be disappointingly comic relief in the next panel by coughing from being left in the dust that Sonic created, and says that he'll even follow him to another world. Okay, so it is a portal to another world? And the text confused me for a second when the next panel it had world in sarcastic quotation marks while showing Knuckles sunbathing. So Angel Island is another world? No, it's not round, so it can't qualify as a planet. And the quotation marks are there. Suddenly he notices a green sun, only to realize it was just that a green meteor had passed in front of the sun, creating a really cool effect. And he says that as the guardian of the island, it's his job to check it out. Why isn't he just assuming this is a Chaos Emerald instead of just saying it's a meteor? It smashes into a mountain that somehow, according to Knuckles, no one in history has ever climbed. Really. And Knuckles unnecessarily tries to give the audience a scientific explanation for his gliding when magic would have worked better. After gliding and climbing up to it, he notices that the Chaos Emerald is still burrowing into the rock, as if it's a radioactive stone that's sinking into the ground like acid. And again, this is a really cool concept that makes perfect sense. It's called the Chaos Emerald after all. Suddenly, the whole mountain starts vibrating, and Knuckles gets knocked out by a rock falling on his head, making him fall to his supposed doom. And we cut to Sonic going into the zone, and Fang is talked to by a wristwatch with a tiny statue of Eggman giving a message to keep Sonic from recovering the Emerald Shard. I like how Fang shows character and relatability by pressing the mute button on him. Makes sense that he wouldn't like him. But it doesn't make sense that Eggman put a mute button there in the first place. I guess his idea was that Fang would press it when Sonic was nearby to keep him from hearing Eggman's message and revealing he was there, but by the time you'd think to do that, Sonic would have already heard it. Fang goes after Sonic and says that the computer in his goofy-looking sky cycle is programmed to mimic Sonic's every move. Why is he telling Eggman this? Wouldn't Eggman already know that since he was the only one who would have been able to make such a thing for him? And he's clearly trying to talk to Eggman after muting his message here. So is he in trouble with Eggman now for muting him? Guess not, since Eggman's desperate. Maybe the reason he's hired a living being to track Sonic instead of just sending one of his robots is that he's counting on Sonic's hesitancy to kill a non-robot, making him hold back against them. But he can't do this very often because what living being would want to side with Eggman? Not very many of them. We see a very quick montage of Sonic going through a whole bunch of zones in Triple Trouble, representing the game more properly than all of the adaptations thus far from the sheer amount of zones fit into one story. This gives you a sense that Sonic actually went on an adventure through all those places, while the previous adaptations only felt like Sonic went through a few places. Sonic finally reaches a Chaos Emerald. Oh, he actually does use his Super Peel out again. Too bad it still proves my point because Sonic had this ability in Sonic Triple Trouble, so this might be the only reason he's using it and he'll never remember he has it again. Not that I'm really complaining, since him being able to reach warp speed whenever he wants sounds overpowered. He can already run at the speed of sound whenever he wants. Now in the Chaos Emerald Chamber, Sonic says that it's time to shut something down, whatever that something is. And he says that the reason the zone he was in was so weird was that this was only one half of Chaos Emerald. I don't remember the zones in Triple Trouble being weird enough for justifying Sonic saying that. The levels in Sonic CD definitely would have fit because of their psychedelic coloring, especially with the sky, but Triple Trouble's level aesthetics were pretty down to earth and typical of Sonic games. Water level, jungle, ice level, etc. I guess he's saying that because he just came out of a special stage? Unfortunately, Fang knocks Sonic out with his Neural Disruptor. Again, if this wasn't made by Eggman, then who made it for him? If all he had to do was knock Sonic out, then what was the point of sending a living being to fight Sonic instead of just some random robot who would have a Neural Disruptor? I'm pretty sure Eggman could have made his own. We then see Sonic tied to a stone outside, and Fang tells Eggman through his watch that he's got half the emerald. Oh, for fuck's sake, why is he called Knack? Everybody hates that stupid censorship-induced renaming. And the only thing that would have saved this for me is if Fang immediately complained about being called that, saying that Fang's his cooler sounding nickname while Knack was his embarrassing birth name. But they don't even do that. He's fine with it. Eggman puts something with a spike on his wall while telling Fang to bring Sonic along when he gets the other half. And this creates the unnecessarily gruesome imagined image that he's planning on mounting Sonic to his wall like an insane psychopath. That was out of place. What is this, Saw? I'm impressed that Fang had the guts to demand double the price from Eggman of all people. What makes him think Eggman's not going to try to boss-size him after he does all of his dirty work for him? Fang moves over the water with its vehicle while saying that its computer is tracking the other half of the jewel, presumably the same way Rotors has with tracking its high energy level. And Fang says it must be located on the floating island. So this is where Knuckles will come in. I hope this isn't the end of Sonic's contribution to the story, because that'd really be a disappointment, him coming all this way just to be effortlessly bested by Naxa Weasel. Knuckles wakes up in front of a bunch of Mobians wearing weird masks on their face, who I dislike already. Let's hope they actually do something to endear themselves to me, because these are just random new characters come out of nowhere. Knuckles says he recognizes them from a book of myths, calling them the Ancient Walkers. And since this comic is trying to make me believe that there's a whole village of people on Angel Island with Knuckles, I guess it would make sense that Knuckles would be exposed to books on the island because of that. He screams in terror at someone pointing a pointed stick at him, only for the person to paint on the cave wall. I love him being made the butt of a joke like this. He was being taken way too seriously for the kind of jerk he's been so far. So my question is why the person didn't just explain to him that he wasn't going to hurt him instead of freaking him out. Unless there's a language barrier, and the reason he's painting the wall is to communicate that way. But then why didn't he start painting a lot earlier instead of waiting for Knuckles to wake up first? Besides, Knuckles probably should have guessed that if these guys really wanted to kill him with a pointy stick, they wouldn't have waited for him to wake up first. Knuckles is told that the meteor he saw was only half of a Chaos Emerald. And then he's shown a magnet, which he somehow figures out to mean that the two gems have a magnetic attraction to each other. See, this didn't come out of nowhere with Tails and SA2, because the idea that the emeralds are connected with each other has been around since the old days. Although they can attract each other, I wonder why the two halves of the emerald split off in opposite directions. By the way, why does the ancient walker know what a magnet is so that he can draw a picture of it? And why does Knuckles know what a magnet is either? Knuckles is told that the gems are powerful enough that the shard will tunnel through solid rock to join with the whole one. Again, really fascinating concept in addition to the lore. But then it's explained that for some stupid reason, the two halves joining together would blow the island to bits from an energy imbalance, meaning Knuckles has to stop that from happening. Then he's made to drink from a bowl or smell or something, which I'm guessing warps him back to the island? He sure is lucky the ancient walkers happen to stumble into him to give him this information. Knuckles awesomely punches Fang in the chin, while leaping out of the bushes saying he'll give him a knuckle sandwich. He then says that he's out cold and his sky cycle's going into the lake. Unfortunately, it turns out Sonic was in the sky cycle, and somehow he didn't drown even though he was unconscious when he was knocked into the water. So he should have automatically breathed the water in. Conveniently, he wakes up just in time instead of drowning, and goes into a spin dash which magically gets him out of the water. Knuckles jumps to the conclusion that Sonic's behind this for some reason, and Sonic immediately starts a fight with him, which he was planning to do earlier anyways. You know, I was expecting the revelation that the reformation of two halves of the Emerald could blow up the island to be the explanation for why Knuckles would turn on Sonic again. A much better explanation than the actual game, where there really was none. Knuckles would naturally not want Sonic to get the two halves of the Emeralds close to each other. And I guess he might not have any way of knowing that Fang's a bad guy who's kidnapped Sonic instead of someone helping him get the two halves together. But still, while I guess it is justified on Knuckles' part, this fight looks really sudden and contrived, especially on Sonic's part. The two look just as hot-headed and violent as each other here, when you'd think Sonic would be more carefree, since that's literally in his official character description. I'm fine with the slight personality difference for the comic Sonic though, different universe and all. Then Knuckles says he's going Hyper Knuckles on him, but instead of actually doing that, he just magically turns his hands into buzzsaws out of nowhere. He's not a cyborg. This sure is an interesting magical ability of his, that's for sure. I hope he does this in more than just one issue of the comic, or this is going to be almost as bad as Sonic turning invisible at one point. When Sonic says, "Am I supposed to be impressed?" there's really no reason for him to act like that instead of being terrified of, buzzsaws cutting into his skin, because he shouldn't really be aware of the concept of hyperforms by this point. He's never even seen a Super Emerald yet, so it can't be that he was expecting the actual Hyper Knuckles here and is mocking him for not being that way. Of course, while anyone would cringe at Knuckles actually getting a hit on Sonic with buzzsaws for hands, of course Sonic is completely unharmed by that and immediately gets up to spin dash at him with no cuts whatsoever. I don't really want to see blood in a Sonic comic, but then don't have him get hurt in a way where him not getting that result shown to us would be insulting to our intelligence. He was clearly hit by something that should have cut him. Fortunately, the two stop fighting like hated enemies when Eggman tries to talk to Fang the Sniper through its watch in front of him, making them work together to make Robotnik spill his plan, making Fang nod his head and sit up to do so. This was a pretty smart plan of theirs. Knuckles warns Sonic that the other half is on its way to join with the half in Fang's backpack to cause an explosion. And Knuckles tells him that he has a shortcut to the central chamber. They run through the passage underground and finally explain why they decided to run right up to what might be ground zero of an explosion. Knuckles says that their only chance is if the two halves are more attracted to each other than the unfamiliar whole one. It sure is nice of the two of them to have been so in sync with their thoughts that they both decided to go through with this plan at the same time without Knuckles needing to explain this motivation until now. Their plan works! Emerald green fire, that's a cool concept. And then they get teleported back to the surface with the Chaos Emerald gone. What, was the Emerald sentient and decided to use Chaos Control on them to reward them? Well, at least this wasn't used as a dumb excuse for Sonic and Knuckles to start fighting again. Sonic says he'll go home with Fang's Sky Cycle, and explains that he saw a remote switch on his wrist radio, which I guess is supposed to explain why he's able to go home with it, knowing where exactly to go. I think it's really nice of Sonic to say sorry about our misunderstanding, even if Knuckles would have gotten into a fight with him, even if Sonic hadn't attacked first for no reason. But of course the two still don't trust each other. I don't blame Sonic at all for not trusting Knuckles, because Knuckles doesn't trust him, which is why he's such a jerk to him and constantly tries to hurt him. That's not a good enough explanation for his hatred, though. Why doesn't he trust Sonic? Just because he's not from his island? If that's not nerve-level bigotry, nothing is. All non-Angel Islanders are evil, apparently. We see the story end with ancient walkers getting their hands on the emerald falling into their lap, and the text saying meaninglessly that the cycle begins anew. And the next story is about the Sea Fox, Tails' submarine, starting its first voyage. I like how Rotor explains that Tails has been wanting a submarine since they rode in Rotor's Bathysphere, whatever that weirdly named thing is. Well, not entirely, since the only reason he'd say this, since Tails already knows it, is to give exposition to the audience. But I like that he gave him a submarine for remembering that minor thing. It's sweet. Apparently, that Bathysphere was the thing that Rotor used to save Sonic when he was trapped underwater really early on in the comic. And since the Sea Fox was entirely made because of this thing, that disproves the idea that the early Sonic miniseries, issue 2, was non-canon just because it was so early on. Which makes me wonder why the Freedom Emeralds story was non-canon. Anyways, of course, Tails is really angry and disappointed that Rotor was ordered to not put any oil in the submarine form, since it basically destroys the entire point of Rotor making a submarine in the first place. What a waste of his time, materials, and efforts! Why did he even bother then? Suddenly a seagull shows up covered in oil and tells Tails that he escaped from a robot making factory under the water. Why didn't he drown for being under the water? Having filled the submarine with oil from the seagull, Tails rams the submarine into a giant octopus robot after coming to an underwater robot factory, and this awesome moment freeing some inexplicably talking fish lets Tails destroy some roboticizers with his missiles. And then the issue just ends, after Tails brags that he can't wait to tell his friends about his adventure, even though he should know that if he does tell them, he'll just get in trouble with Sally for going on an adventure all on his own. And this is probably something he realized before telling them, which is why there was still oil in the submarine for Tails to run away in it in the previous issue, which takes place chronologically after this story because they want to confuse the audience. Because it was so short, there's not much to say about the story other than the fact that I love the fact that it allowed Tails to actually be competent and useful, and with no strings attached. And then at First Contact, which isn't about an alien, so I'm not sure why they called it that, we see that Knuckles has always known Vector on the floating island, and complains about him getting into trouble a lot and requiring him to save him as he saves him. Why was he even there? It was a dangerous place. Then Knuckles goes up to a rock because he heard a low sound, a rock with the name Archimedes on it for some reason, and he says that he had smelled the smoke coming from it earlier. He wonders who Archimedes is and how he could make the inscription and get away without him seeing. Maybe because he weren't omniscient of everything that happens on the island at all times? After uselessly talking to a bird who doesn't know what happens to the stone, why did they put that in the comic? Knuckles gets attacked by a fire-shooting robot of Eggman, so was put on the island for some reason. And for some really strange reason, paranoid old Knuckles assumes Eggman called himself Archimedes. Why would he do that? He fights another giant robot and falls into the Chaos Chamber. And then he starts actually communicating with Archimedes, who complains that first he thinks he's some hedgehog, and then a tyrant, and says that he wants to teach him a lesson and make him reflect. cut out with this pseudo-philosophical bullshit. He wants Knuckles to come and find him on his own. Basically, he's an insane old coot who just wants to play hide and seek for shits and giggles. Because, you know, just talking to Knuckles and meeting up with him would be too damn simple. Doesn't Knuckles have a job to do? Why is he distracting him from his job with this hide and seek bullshit? I hate this guy already. And the next evening, Vector is right with Knuckles and complains that he's being too quiet. I don't like the idea that we're supposed to accept that he's just known Knuckles all along. Is this really his first appearance? Or did I miss an issue that was supposed to introduce him because somebody didn't include the story with him in their issue footage? This is part of why I hate having the comic have multiple stories cramped into one issue. It's so easy to miss out on stories. Why can't there just be one story an issue? Then they can make well, I guess it would be greedy and money grubbing of them. They'd make more issues and we have to buy more. Whatever. I really enjoyed this story. The first one, I mean. It was really entertaining seeing just how the comic would have its own spin on the story of Sonic Triple Trouble. And it had some fascinating new lore to how the Chaos Emeralds work that made things all more intriguing. The whole there's only one emerald and it was split into half, and the two halves go all over the place just to reunite with each other, and even creates another zone in the process thing, was a really interesting and creative plot. Much more interesting than just Eggman having all the emeralds and then they split up from each other. Although, creating a new zone was really pointless in retrospect. The region could have just been there all along and there wouldn't have been a problem. The emeralds seem to be acting without logic or reason to them, doing really weird things, wanting obsessively to reunite with each other for the sake of it, creating a whole new region of the world just because, going off in opposite directions after being split in half when they want to reunite right afterwards anyways. But again, these are Chaos Emeralds, it's right there in the name. They don't think like people do. They do chaotic things for mysterious reasons because they're so full of magic that they defy and break physics with their mere presence and operate on their own eternal logic, which makes sense to them. This is so much more interesting than the game's past Adventure 1 where the Chaos Emeralds are just generic magical gems with no real spin to it. I guess it was nice that Sonic got one-up by Fang, even if it was humiliating to him, and Fang being coughing in the dust in his first appearance gave off the false implication that he wasn't really meant to be taken seriously, only to be a very major competent threat, kidnapping Sonic up until Knuckles knocked him out by surprise. Which is actually pretty good karma to him. He knocked out Sonic and then he got knocked out himself. Fang made a great villain here, being competent and showing off why Mobian might work with Eggman. Because he's just that much of a selfish jerk, he just wants Eggman to pay him. Pay him in a world where money has no value. Where was Fang planning on spending the money again? I doubt Knothole would let him in. He's a criminal, and it's the only place where we've seen currency being used, and Mobian's having a place to live safe from Eggman. What value to Fang could money possibly have? So his whole motivation is just completely pointless. It doesn't fit into the comics universe because money has no value in it. I guess he's supposed to be just that much of a jerk, but if he was only doing this to discourage Eggman from roboticizing him, that would have made a lot more sense than Fang wanting money in a world without much of an economy. And there was no explanation for who made his high-tech machinery if it wasn't Eggman. I doubt Uncle Chuck made it willingly for him. Maybe it was stolen from Uncle Chuck. I also hate how arbitrary Knuckles and Sonic fighting each other was. Especially since Sonic started the fight just from seeing him there, which was out of character for him. And I just remembered, why the hell didn't Sonic bring Tails with him? So far we've had a consistent pattern of Tails being brought along for the ride with Sonic in game adaptations of games where Tails was playable. Tails was playable in Sonic Triple Trouble. Granted, there was no Sonic and Tails mode where he was following Sonic around and both going on the adventure together, so I guess that was a justification, that Tails never really did go on an adventure in Triple Trouble and he was just a what-if scenario. But oh wait! Tails flies the plane in the special stages and in the ending of that game, so he had to have gone on the adventure with Sonic. So never mind. If Tails was with Sonic, well, maybe Fang would have knocked him out too, unless he could only knock out one person at a time. But there was at least a chance that Tails could have warned him about Fang in time, and maybe after he was thrown into the water, Sonic would have been too preoccupied with saving Tails to immediately go to fighting Knuckles after jumping out of the water. Okay, maybe he didn't have much use in this story, but excluding him from a game adaptation of a game where he was playable still seems arbitrary. This story and the Tails one were written by Mike Gallagher, the Tails one that I really liked for letting Tails be competent and no strings attached for once. I was expecting them to humiliate him at some point, but they didn't. I'm not too keen on the Ken Penders story though. No, not just because it was written by him, but actually it's because it's just a story that's a worthless setup for a later story. Why the hell are they wasting our time with Archimedes playing hide and seek with Knuckles when we could have just immediately skipped to the issue where they meet up? That whole story could have been removed from existence and nothing would have been lost. They shouldn't have stories that have nothing happen in them other than just setup. It should just be like a part of the story they're setting up to. And I don't like being expected to believe that Vector had always known Knuckles and they've been best pals off screen up to now. I would rather have him be introduced in the comic itself and their friendship start. Like, naturally start, and we get an explanation for why they're friends. Again, I don't know if I'm missing the story that introduced him, but this is not a good way to introduce him, especially since its only character right now is idiot that Knuckles has to save constantly. Why was he even there? But that was just a dark spot in an otherwise fantastic issue. I just don't understand why in a special dedicated entirely to a game adaptation of Sonic Triple Trouble, they decided to put in some random extra stories that are also canon that, incidentally, I had a hell of a time actually getting footage for, making me paranoid that I missed a bunch of other stories because they weren't with the other game adaptations I read, like Sonic CDs. No, it just checked I didn't miss anything. Next up is issue 29.